So we've actually got a record number of people signed up tonight. So welcome everyone that's made it. We have a lot to get through, so I'm just going to dive straight in and get going. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Emily Webb and I'm a speech and language therapist by training, and I work for Tobii Dynavox. My job is very varied, but it partly involves looking at the implementation, training and education that surrounds our products. So tonight we are looking at something that is brand new for us at Tobii Dynavox, and it is an innovative and, to be quite honest, quite astounding piece of technology called VocaliD. So I am really thrilled to be joined by Rupal Patel, the CEO and founder of VocaliD. So welcome tonight, Rupal. Can you just very quickly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Emily. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to you and to Rob for putting this on. My name is Rupal Patel. I'm a faculty member at Northeastern University in Boston, and the research that came out of my lab there really has started and sparked this company, VocaliD, which I'm currently leading and really excited about telling you more about.
Fab, thank you. So the format for this evening is very simple. We're going to have three broad sections. We'll have an overview of VocaliD, a question and answer, and then we're going to top it all off with an exciting announcement, which I have tactically saved right until the end. So we'll be aiming to talk for about 45 minutes this evening, so not too long out for your evening, hopefully. So we have some ground rules for Power Clinic. So firstly, they are really informal, so please use the chat window and ask anything that you like. There are no stupid questions, so we have a huge range of people with varied experience on the webinar this evening, so ask anything that you feel is necessary, within reason, obviously. If you need to revisit a particular topic after the webinar, then please book a one-on-one with either myself or someone from the team. And this is the VocaliD Creating Custom Voices Clinic, so let us know anything else that you would like to see. And we will be switching between myself and Rupal as presenters this evening, so please allow us the time to do this and use the opportunity to post any of your comments and questions. So really, I think it's best to start with a little bit of context to this evening, and I think the best place to start is a quick nod to voice banking. So many of you will be familiar with the concept of voice banking, and I know that we've certainly got some experts listening in right now, but for those of you who this is a new concept, this is just a very quick whistle-stop tour. So broadly speaking, and I'm sure Rupal, you can let me know if there's anything that I've missed out here, but broadly speaking, it is a process that allows individuals to store their voice for future use within a high-tech AAC system. Would you say that's a good, broad, general term, Rupal?
Yeah. Yes.
And now what that means is that someone who knows that they are going to become an AAC user can go through a process which involves recording a variety of different sentences. So typically this process takes anywhere between 5 to 8 hours, as it involves recording a large number of different sentences that are all recorded to capture the different combinations of sounds that can be found within that language. And that means it can be converted into a synthesized voice, so it can be used like any of the voices that you download within the system. Now, this isn't our main focus of the evening, but this is something that VocaliD offers, isn't it, Rupal?
It is, and I'm going to explain a little bit of the difference between message banking and voice banking, and also what we do to create a voice at VocaliD when a voice is banked.
Fab. So we'll have a little bit more of that this evening. But also the MND Association has a really good part on their website about this. So if you are interested in looking into that in more detail, then I would direct you towards that. But it's not possible for all users to complete. And this leads us on to some of the limitations of voice banking. Now, I think one of the first things to mention are the emotional implications of something like voice banking. So the process is typically for those who are facing a progressive condition like motor neurone disease. Now, making the decision to bank your voice in preparation for becoming an AAC user is understandably a topic that many may not want to face just yet, or something they don't feel ready to pursue. So by the time they perhaps have come to terms with the idea and are emotionally ready to complete voice banking, their speech may have deteriorated to the point where they aren't able to make clear enough recordings to bank their voice, which is why it's very important to mention that voice banking doesn't improve the voice. So if you have lost clarity and are banking what has become a dysarthric voice, then the synthesized voice produced will also be dysarthric to the same extent. So it is worth mentioning that if we're talking about individuals who potentially have some dysarthria, then recording such a large databases of sentences, it's also very tiring and it may take a long time to complete. But I think the last and arguably one of the most important limitations is that voice banking is not an option for many individuals. So they may have been born with a communication difficulty, for example, cerebral palsy, or perhaps find themselves suddenly faced with needing to use AAC, so not having the opportunity to go through voice banking. And of course, those individuals with a progressive condition who find that it's perhaps too late to bank their voice in the traditional way, maybe because of those earlier limitations that we've discussed. Now, this is where VocaliD really starts to get very clever, and I would like to pass over to Rupal, who will talk us through it in more detail. So if I just change us over, and we should find that we have your screen.
Excellent.
That's great.
Okay, thank you so much, Emily. Yeah, that's a great sort of background to why we created VocaliD, and really for us, we were looking at people who were born with conditions such as cerebral palsy or other congenital impairments where speech is impaired from an early age, and really they're given a handful of generic voices to use for their whole life. And in fact, the same adult voice is probably given to a child early on, and they use it for many years to come. So the problem we were solving is that every one of these individuals actually has a unique voice. My initial research was showing that people with very severe dysarthria were still able to control some aspects of their voice. And these are typically the melodic aspects of the voice are relatively preserved. So they can control pitch and loudness, and you hear that in the vocalizations that they make with familiar caregivers. So what we were really interested in is, well, how do you capture that? And then if you can capture enough of that sound, can you actually endow that sound into the speech synthesis that they're using so that the words that they're saying also come out in the voice that's uniquely theirs, rather than giving them a functional one-size-fits-all solution. So that's how VocaliD was born. We really believe that our voices are obviously not identical. Every one of us has a unique voice that conveys who we are, our age, our gender. So much about us is embedded in our voices. And they are actually our identities, right? We have cultural as well as social attributes that are part of our voice. You can tell where a person's from very, very easily. The other thing is there's some really interesting new research coming out about the social aspects of your voice and how it's important for your self-identity. So when an AAC user hears a generic sounding functional synthesis voice as their voice all the time, what is the impact on them in terms of self-identity? I think it's a question that we really haven't asked. AAC's come so far. There's so much that's happened in the field, and I think now it's time for us to think about the personalization aspect. We've started thinking about personalization in terms of vocabulary and context and so on, and I think voice is sort of that next frontier, but to be thinking about personalization. So, as you know, there are these tens of millions of people who are living with voicelessness or speechlessness due to lots of different conditions. And those generic sounding voices really don't fit their bodies or their personalities, right? So there's something that we need to do. But the reason that we haven't, I think, as a field really addressed this issue is because the time and cost to building a custom voice is actually very high. The common approach up until we came along, and even still now, if you want to make a high-quality synthetic voice, is to hire a voice actor who then spends hours recording in the studio, far more than 5 to 7 hours. These are recordings of usually in the order of 40 to 50 hours, and these are trained individuals who know what they're doing for those 40 to 50 hours. And then all those high-quality recordings are poured over by an army of engineers and scientists with months and months of effort to create a one-size-fits-all voice, or a high-quality synthetic voice. And a great example of this is the Siri voice. Siri's voice cost an undisclosed sum of millions of dollars to create, and in the end, you got one really high-quality, white, 40-something-ish, middle-class American-sounding woman's voice from that. And so, we at VocaliD want to do something different, and we believe that obviously that price point and that kind of effort wasn't going to give us the voices that are individualized. And so we do something pretty different is we ask people from around the world. These are not speech impaired individuals. These are everyday talkers and they range in age from whoever wants to be on that platform to be able to bank their voice, not only for themselves, but actually to share with others. So we created an online platform. We crowdsourced essentially what voice actors were doing to create those custom voices. We crowdsourced that, not custom voices, sorry, those generic voices. We crowdsourced that by creating this online web platform. And what it is essentially is that you don't necessarily have to be in a studio or a recording studio to do this. You can be in the comfort of your own home as long as you're in a quiet room wearing a headset microphone and using the Chrome browser. It really has to be the Chrome browser for now. Eventually it'll be any browser. But now anyone can bank their voice for someone else or for themselves. It's a very, very simple process. It looks exactly like this. What I'm showing you is a picture of the voice banking studio, and you can get to it right off of our website. On the back wall, you have what we call the periodic table of speech sounds. These are all the various different speech sounds necessary in English to create any combination of speech that we'd like. And you get a list of sentences that are read out loud. So the sentences there's 3,500 sentences in total that we ask people to say. Some people complete this process within 3 to 4 hours. Younger children tend to take a little bit longer because they tend to listen to themselves. Again, you can play back the sample. And also you can actually hear this sentence being said out loud in case you're not a proficient reader or a reader of that language as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to have reading skills. So currently, we actually have been able to grow this voice bank asset quite a bit. We have over 16,000 voice donors who have started banking their voice with us at VocaliD. And like I said, again, they range in age from 6 to 91. So really a huge variety of voices. And we really need that huge variety of voices to be able to create a voice that's uniquely tailored to someone, because the age of the individual, where they're from in terms of their accent, is going to end up in the voices that we create as well. So what you see here is a map of the different places around the world where people have contributed. The different colors indicate the different genders. So we have males, females, and we actually have a category where people don't want to disclose what gender they are. And that's been a very interesting large pocket of individuals who sometimes are actually banking their voice prior to a gender transition and post-gender transition. So there's really interesting reasons for why people decide to bank their voice or share their voice with someone and me. Okay, so I'll tell you about the two sort of products that we have. There are the two ranges of the scale. So Emily was really talking about, you have a condition where you can bank your voice and we can recreate your voice. And there are other options for this. There are other companies as well as research groups that are taking this on, and they range in price. So what we are doing is we can actually do that as well. We call that vocal legacy, and I'll explain to you what that sounds like in a little bit. Our process is not all that different from others in the sense that you have to record speech, but our sentences have been fine-tuned so that the more information-laden sentences come earlier, so you can reduce the number of sentences that people say. Also, the process with how we make a voice is quite different, and it allows for a higher fidelity voice to be created. So that's vocal legacy. But the unique aspect of what we can do is what we call a bespoke voice. A bespoke voice is uniquely tailored for someone who can only really make a very little amount of sound. And these are people, could be someone with a degenerative condition or someone who is born with a condition who is unable to speak. And so even though they're unable to speak, they can still create some sound. And that sound is what we use to custom make their voice. So I'm going to step you through the bespoke voice building process. What we need is just as little as 2 to 3 seconds of the non-speaking individual's voice sample. And that is some kind of a vowel-like production, something like this. That's a young woman, 9 years old, who has cerebral palsy, who we were able to elicit that little amount of sound. And I'll show you how we elicit that in a second. We then search our database our voice bank data.
Please tell me if you don't understand what I am saying.
To find her age-matched, gender-matched, as well as location-matched voice donor. So with those recordings from the individual who we're making the voice from, we call him the recipient, as well as the donor samples, we combine those together using our voice blending and matching algorithms. We then can generate this voice.
My name is Maeve. I feel happy.
So you can see that it has qualities of the donor voice, but it also has qualities of the recipient voice sample together. And we're really customizing and uniquely crafting this voice. A few years ago, I was explaining this process to my daughter, who was then 6, and she said, "Mommy, you're mixing colors to paint voices." And that's what we're doing. The analogy is that we take that sound from the individual who cannot speak and really use it to infuse into the recordings of the voice donor that we have. So how does the person who's unable to speak then give us these samples? Well, they can upload the samples of sounds that we need, or they can come to our, what we call our bespoke recording studio. Again, all of this is online, so we're not asking someone to come into a studio. We're not asking the clinicians to do additional work, because I think that the scalability of that is going to be low. We want lots of people from anywhere to be able to create their own voice. So we tell them what kinds of sounds we need, which are typically vowel-like sounds, and they give us several samples of these, and we analyze those and use those in our process of building the voice. And as I said earlier, we can also take original recordings and create a voice as well. So I'm going to play you the quality of the recordings, of some original recordings, as well as the quality of voice that we can build. So this is the typical process that you're probably familiar with voice banking.
Banking your voice for yourself. The original recordings.
The air is always cleaner in the mountains. Brothers and sisters don't always get along. Every now and then, you surprise me.
So those are the original recordings. We again take those, and with our voice blending or voice building algorithms, we create this voice.
Samples of Vocal Legacy by VocaliD.
The air is always cleaner in the mountains. Put on your sweater and let's get out of here. Giving your voice can change lives.
So again, it is a synthesized voice of the original recordings. You hear the voice quality. Synthesis still does have some issues with emotion, and it's not fully human-like, but it's as close as we can get right now. And we're actually starting to implement a very new type of speech synthesis technology called deep neural networks. And it's the most cutting edge of synthesis. And so I think you're going to see different quality from what we can produce in terms of the way the voices sound. So what do our early adopters say? So we have now a few people that are using our voices. There's going to be a whole lot more at the end of this year who are going to be receiving their voices, because we actually just launched the company earlier this year and are kind of clearing the backlog of people who have ordered their voices. There's over 100 now. We just passed the 100 mark just last week. So when Sarah first got her voice, she says, well, it sounds spunky, and that's just it's great, because she was using a voice that was the same as Maeve, that was a 9-year-old, Sarah's 16 years old. So, having that individuality is a really important piece for young people who want to be seen and heard as themselves. Max, similar to his father, said, this voice sounds compassionate like Max. So there's not only these benefits for the recipients, but there's also the benefits for people around them who start hearing aspects of the individual for the first time coming through their AAC devices. Allows for way different sort of connection with the AAC device, and we hope actually greater use of the devices themselves. And then John is a gentleman who had ALS. He was diagnosed 8 years ago, and it happened so quickly that he didn't have the opportunity to bank his voice or even do any message banking at all. So we were able to create a voice for him. In fact, we created several options for his voices, for his voice when we were doing this last year. And first couple of voice samples that we played for him, he and his wife said, yeah, it sounds better than the generic Ryan voice that we've been using all along. But it still sounded like something foreign to them. We played the third voice option for him, and his entire body sort of went into shakes, and his wife said, God, that sounds like you, that's you. And so we were able to do this because what John can now do is he has only a little bit of sound left, but we were able to take that sound from him and use it to craft this voice that was uniquely his. For others, I'm going to show you a little video of a young woman, her name is Delaney. We were able to look at pre and post voice measures of how her communication initiation has changed over time. And we're seeing reports of as high as 300% more communication initiation and participation. These are not small changes. These are humongous changes. And I'm just going to let Delaney, this video about her, speak for itself.
My name is Delaney Sepple. I am 17 years old. I was born with cerebral palsy, and I couldn't speak. When I couldn't speak, I was said I couldn't share things. I couldn't tell people what I wanted.
She started at a very young age using picture boards, but it's very frustrating when you're trying to get your point across and you're looking for a picture that doesn't exist on a board. Really, it's like a game of charades. Delaney has used a communication device in the past. It sounded like an answering machine, very computerized. It just wasn't a little girl. Along, I was her voice, and I spoke for her. If she needed something, if she wanted to say something, she would look to me, and I would speak for her. And now she's able to speak for herself, and people listen.
Yeah, and so that's where I just want to end, because you can hear in our example, she was using the new voice that we built for her, and that's just the beginning of Delaney's story. And with that, I'll end and just take questions that you may have. Thank you.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, so if we just quickly change back to myself, and then did you want to share your webcam?
Sure.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions already come in. So the first one, I think, is from Gerna. So she asks, has this tool been used to make your own voice by using a child's voice? So I think by that, perhaps are we talking about making voices for children using children who are recording, which I think you've already covered a little bit, haven't you, RuPaul?
Yes, yes. So when we built, let's say, a voice for Maeve, who was a 9-year-old, we took a 9-year-old's recordings, the donor recordings, and Maeve's voice recordings, and created a voice for her. So yes, we've been making voices for children, for adolescents, and as well for older adults who are not able to bank their own voice.
Okay, and then we've also got one from Haley asking, what if the person vocalizing has a very quiet voice when they vocalize?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So sometimes they have a quiet voice, other times just to get that sample, they're really pushing their vocal system, and we get a pretty squealy or high-pitched voice. And this is the issue, I think, where we have to be able to help you guys get the right sample for people, and also we won't know what the original, what these people typically sound like. So we have to capture the best sound, and that's what gets submitted to us. And it may take a couple of trials. We analyze the voice sample to look to see if it's usable or how it, whether we can give some better guidance for that, and then we turn it, and then we will, confirm with you that before we begin building the voice.
Great. Some more questions here. So the next one is, how long does this process take to get to the final product, a voice or voices option for the client?
So that's a really good question. I mean, in terms of the work that goes into it, we're trying to make as much of this as automated as possible. But in these early phases, when we're still learning how to tell people to, what kind of samples they should be submitting, how they should be eliciting those samples if they're unable to do so volitionally. So there's two ways for someone to submit a voice sample. One is to go through the process on the Bespoke Voice Studio and to record e, oo, several different vowel sounds. But sometimes the issue is that people have difficulty with volitionally making that sound. And so then we also offer an upload functionality. that upload functionality allows you to record on something like your phone and then take that recording and upload it to us. What we're getting right now, unfortunately, is sometimes very, very long samples of recordings from people where they're talking and then the recipient is speaking, and this is just adding more and more manual labor time. And also, we don't know which of the samples is most characteristics of the individual. So we have to figure out a way to let people know how to really capture that. This is all new. You know, typically this might be done with a clinician, and we're trying to take on as much of that burden as possible, so it reduces the barrier to entry for people. But we're still kind of in the learning phase of that, to be honest. So if you've got ideas of eliciting, or if you work with a client in order to submit their voice sample, and you have some tips for us, we're really in that learning phase, and we'd love to learn from you as well.
Fab. And then how is it possible to record 3,500 sentences in the time you quote when it takes 6 to 8 hours to record 1,600 with Model Talker? So I'm not actually familiar with Model Talker, but perhaps.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'm quoting averages of what people are taking. So sometimes some people have completed it in as little as 3 to 4 hours. Our interface looks pretty different. So oftentimes it's not about recording time as it is moving around in the interface. So if you get a lot of rejections when you're recording, then it'll take you longer to do a recording, and so on. So we have people that have taken as little as 3 to 4 hours to complete that, but they're really fast. So what they're doing is they're recording, and they're not necessarily listening to their sample again, and they're moving on. And other times it does take longer. But it's really a range, and the important piece here is how long it takes, so making sure that you get the highest quality recording. So we actually feed back recordings to people if they were not good recordings, but in the moment, we don't make them repeat it again and again. So we'll have them do the sample. If we analyze it and it's not clear or is too noisy, we'll feed it back into the loop again. So if you have those errors, it will take longer.
And I wonder if those averages are possibly as well because you're having people complete that who don't have any communication difficulties as part of the voice banking process.
Absolutely.
So perhaps it takes longer.
Yes.
If you have fatigue.
So, absolutely. I mean, we don't have right now a lot of people that are banking their voice for themselves. So like people are doing for Model Talker. We mostly have individuals who are sharing their voice with someone else. So that's definitely a big difference there too.
Yeah, fab. Then someone's asked about the price of UK pounds, and I think I could probably take that one. So at the moment, the retail price in the UK is £1,012 that's both the legacy and the bespoke voice. So they are available to purchase on my Tobii Dynavox. The next question is, does RuPaul think with the technology and know-how of VocaliD to produce musicality like someone would with a whisper or expressing anger, for example?
I love that question. I mean, I think my main passion really is about the melody of one's voice, and I believe really all of our research has been showing that people with dysarthria still have this preserved ability to control their prosody. Synthesis is a different story, though. Trying to make that synthesizer sing or to have some of those that aspect of melodic aspects is still a challenge. I mean, it's something that we aspire to do, and we've got some ideas on how we can be more expressive in the synthesis. But right now, our primary focus is not emotional expressiveness, but it's actually authenticity of the voice and making it sound like that individual. But it's certainly not the only place we want to be in the future.
Next one, can we request a sibling or cousin to donate their vocal plus our non-verbal child to create the personalised voice, and how long does this process take? So wondering whether or not a sibling would be able to potentially just create a synthesised voice from their recording, I gather.
Yeah, I'm going to have to answer the how long part in a second as well, because I think I might not have answered that last, so I'll come back to that in a second. So the sibling voice, absolutely get the siblings to record their sound samples on the voice banking studio and so on. The one thing I will say, though, is that sibling we will not guarantee that you're only going to get the sibling voice as your donor. The reason is because we have lots of evidence to show that sometimes there are better matches for the voice than the sibling voice. And it's quite our policy not to disclose who the donor is for the voice, because it gets into lots of ethical issues which we want to avoid. We do need more voices that are matched to the individual. In some cases, the sibling voice or the cousin voice is going to be the match. In other cases, we may have a better match in our database that's more appropriate for mixing. So when we mix two voices, it's not just the accent of the individual or where they're from and their family background, but it's also the voice quality. Each of us has a different voice. And if we mix voices that are very different from each other, you get a lot more artifact in the voice. And so that is something that we like to have control over, because we want to create not only authentic sounding voices, but the highest quality voices. And so we really need other people to contribute their voice samples, but dictating that it has to be this cousin's voice as the donor voice is probably not going to lead to the best option. And so we don't do that. In terms of how long does it take, once someone records the voice, so once someone purchases a voice and puts in an order for a voice, they then are told to go and submit their voice sample. Once they have their voice sample, it takes us a little bit to just analyze that voice sample. And usually a little bit means, it will be down to about a day or two to be doing that analysis. Now, if there's a lot of people in queue, then that's going to take a little bit longer to do. We then search our database, our algorithm searches our databases for the right matches. We find the right match for the individual, and we present actually up to three different options in terms of voice donors for you to choose from. At that point, the individual will choose one of those voice donor options, and then we'll start crafting the voice. Currently, we have a backlog because we have about 100 voices we need to build, which in the next couple of months we should be cleared from that backlog. But it really is going to depend on the demand that we have for this. So ideally, we want to be able to turn around a voice within less than a week to a month. That's our ideal goal. And we have been building voices relatively quickly right now. If we don't have a donor match or anyone close to it, then there's a little bit of a glitch in that we have to then run a voice drive or try to get people in that particular demographic. But that really hasn't happened yet. So, unless the recipient is in a demographic space where we have no donors, then that becomes a little bit of a longer haul.
We have got a lot of people asking about the platforms that this works on. So which particular platforms can you purchase a VocaliD voice for?
Yes, so our voices run on Windows platforms, so Tobii Dynavox devices that are Windows devices. They also run on other manufacturers' Windows devices as well. In addition to the iPhone, the iOS platform. Now with iOS, the issue is that every new manufacturer that we work with, AAC manufacturer, has to actually also build a layer of compatibility, because that's just the way iOS works. And so we've decided to just work with a few manufacturers. And so, and then the list is going to grow over time, but initially it's just a handful. Tobii Dynavox, we are going to be approaching that, the iOS aspect of it, probably in 2017. But it also works with Tobii Dynavox Android devices, so keep that in mind. So all three platforms, our voices will work on all three, Android, iOS, as well as Windows.
We've got a lot of questions coming through, so I'm just searching through to make sure we're not repeating anything. Someone's asking, what about if the AAC user can't make vowel sounds? So if it was just something like a giggle, would that be an option?
Well, a giggle is hard because a giggle's not going to have a sustained enough sound, and you don't want all the voices to be giggle-like, right? So they probably, if they can make a giggle, so there's times where we've gotten out sounds from people by just kind of getting them to make these, like they don't have to say ah as a distinct ah like you and I would make, as long as it's some kind of vocalization that's sustained for a few seconds long. In some cases, we've even tried to like have the person watch TV or you know, and make sound during the time that they are involved with something else, because oftentimes it's a non-volitional sound that is the kind of voice that they typically create.
Okay, and just looking through here, so is it possible to use an external high-quality microphone, and is this recommended? So
yes.
To create the recordings, I think that is.
Yes, you need to use an external high-quality microphone. You need to wear a headset microphone. So just, you know, we actually have some recommendations on our website about brands that we use. They're not expensive. We actually do not want a noise canceling microphone because the noise cancellation actually adds more artifact into the voice. And so we give a couple of recommendations of brands of microphones that we want people to be using. They're typically not more than $30 to $40 US, so it's not a huge expense on that end. But the higher the quality of the recordings, both of the recipient as well as the donor, the higher the quality voice we can build. So I'll say that our biggest challenge right now is when voice donors do not use appropriate equipment. We have ways in which we can clean the audio and do different things, but it doesn't get rid of background noise or a dog barking in the background or things like that. So the higher the quality of the recordings, the better the voice we're going to be able to build. And this is a really, really important piece. And the only reason we can afford to create voices at such a low price point is only because we are crowdsourcing voices. Because remember, we're doing something very different than any other company. We are not making one voice, which then gets used by lots of people, which you can make, you know, you can put a lot more expenses into that. We're trying to make a voice for each individual, a unique voice for each individual. This is, you know, until now, it was, you know, like I said earlier, in terms of the Siri voice, millions of dollars to create that, or at least hundreds of thousands to create a low-quality version of it, right? So if you really want this to scale and you want something like this to be available, we have to invest in getting people to submit the highest quality recordings.
Yeah. And another question here about the interface. Does that help control for things like volume and pitch variation? And do you find that process difficult?
You mean the recording interface?
I would assume that's what it meant.
Yeah, so we do a lot of analysis of the voices. So we give a little bit of feedback in terms of if the voice was, you know, if the recording was too loud, or if the recording was inconsistent somehow. We have a calibration phase, but we're not doing an analysis of each sentence on the fly because it actually takes too long and it slows people down. So we do that offline, and then we put back those sentences that people really need to redo.
Okay, and any concerns regarding security issues when banking one's voice? This is an interesting one. So, like for example, voice recognition access to secure sites.
You mean the reuse of the voices?
I guess so, but I'm guessing that would be covered by, I'm assuming you store all of these very securely.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Okay, sure. So, yes, our voices are, we take the security of our voices very seriously, and so we record, we save our voices in a secure way. Voice data as well as the personal data of the individuals are separately saved, and so on and so forth. This is a really important piece of it. The other thing is we are very concerned about things like using a donor voice exactly as is. We will never do that. So we always say that we would always blend your voice, unless, of course, you're banking for yourself. So if you're banking your voice for yourself, I don't want you to have to blend it with somebody else. I just want my original recordings redone as my voice, my vocal legacy. But if I'm banking my voice and to share it with someone else, I don't expect to hear my voice, you know, in like the next train announcement. So it will always be blended in order to create a unique voice.
Fab. And I'm just going to take one more for this evening. I know there's quite a few that we've not answered yet, but the last one for the evening is I'm really interested in the links between voice and identity. Have you published any research on this?
Yeah, we've started publishing some more position pieces, I would say. There is some really interesting research between like social identity and voice that's coming out of Caroline McGettigan's group in the UK. But there's also some more work that we've started doing, you know, it's hard to do research through VocaliD that is sort of separate from basic science research, but we are starting to show things like adoption of AAC use and so on. So I think that this is stuff that we want to get very involved in, so that either specifically or work with collaborators who can access the data separately, so that it isn't colored in any way by our own judgments.
Yes, because I think it was really interesting that you noted that some preliminary reports have shown an increase in AAC use, and I wonder if partly that's the identity of having a voice that is uniquely yours.
Yeah, you know, I think the anecdotal evidence is certainly there. I think we need to start backing that up with more of the objective evidence to say, well, what are they doing? You know, what are new recipients of these voices? How is it changing things for them in terms of device use and so on? And sometimes it's not like, you know, you see these videos of people who get a hearing aid turned on and all of a sudden their eyes are open and they realize, wow, they're hearing sound. In the case of when someone gets a bespoke custom voice, it's actually an adjustment, right? For the initial piece of it, they've been using a device voice for some period of time, and now all of a sudden they are using, you know, they're given a brand new voice. So there is an adjustment period. But it's also interesting is that the impact measures probably shouldn't only be on the recipients. They also need to be on the people around them who start treating them differently, or who give them different opportunities because they're not hearing that same generic sounding voice. So this is sort of a societal attitudinal changes that are taking place as a result of this as well. I'll give you just a couple of quick anecdotes around this. One young woman who's been using our voice actually for some time now, you know, she was primarily a signer and she used to sign because her device, she has good motor control, and her device was something she needed to use, but she felt sign was quicker. But now that she has her own voice, she actually is using that app, you know, anywhere. She's got a part-time job. She tends to be having a broader communication network. I mean, I think that's a really significant change for her. I don't know if the amount of voice use, what the differences are, but I'd love for us to be able to measure that. Another anecdote is a young man or the sibling of a woman who got her voice, and the sibling used to kind of make fun of the generic sounding voices pronunciations initially, mom says, and now that she has a bespoke voice, he just doesn't feel like he could do that anymore. So that's a shift in attitude that's sort of really interesting, I think, in terms of just, you know, how adoption changes.
Fab. Okay, so that was our last question for the evening. So what I want to do just for the last part today, thank you so much for answering all of those questions, Rupal, is to talk about our exciting announcement. So we need your help. So throughout 2017, of course, off the back of this, you've heard how in order for these bespoke voices to be possible, VocaliD requires a huge number of voice donors in order to get the best matches possible. So we are running a voice drive throughout 2017, and we are asking you to take part and donate your voice. So we want to encourage as many people as possible to consider giving their voice as part of this amazing project, and there are lots of benefits to this. Rupal, what would you say the benefits are of becoming a voice donor?
Well, I think there's the intrinsic benefits in terms of, you know, sharing your voice with others. I think the other is that you may end up, you know, needing your voice at some point, but also the more the voices, the higher quality voices we have, your clients are going to benefit from the better quality recordings as well. So it's a win-win, I think.
Yeah, fab. And also, I suppose the more diverse the voice bank, the more matches someone will have, and therefore the more likely it is that a suitable match can be found. Yeah, and also that idea, I suppose, it's not something we necessarily want to think about, but you are recording your voice, so that will be stored indefinitely also. So it's something that you could access in the future if that was something, if you ended up becoming an AAC user. That is also something to consider, I think. It is, you know, that preservation for the future. And you've mentioned about what you need to become a voice donor, so it's a microphone, an internet connection, and obviously the time that's involved with that. But we will be sending out all that information in an email after the webinar, inviting everyone who has attended this evening to sign up for that. So please consider doing this. Not only will you potentially contribute to someone being able to receive their own unique voice, but I've read somewhere that it also helps people like yourself, people, to learn more about the human voice generally. So to improve synthesized voices in the future.
And can I just add one thing to that? We've got a lot of school-aged kids who are doing this activity of voice banking, you know, in order to share it with other individuals who cannot speak. And it's incredible in terms of the empathy that they develop during this process for individuals who have speech impairments. And so, you know, while we obviously want adult voices, we also need kids' voices, really, to create kids' voices. And so it's important that we don't limit sort of the cohort of people who are going to be involved in this voice drive.
Yeah, so please sign up yourselves, get your friends and your family to sign up, get your colleagues involved. We want this to be nationwide. So you can see there's a link below to sign up for that voice drive. But as I said, we will be sending out all the information. And just on the back off of that, so we are going to celebrate this and get things kicked off properly. So we are going to host a voice drive kickoff event on the 19th of January, and we'll be hosting this in Sheffield. And I want to take the opportunity to officially invite all of you to this launch event. Where we'll be bringing together all of those who are donating their voices and all of those who want to. It will be a chance to hear from those individuals who are potentially already using VocaliD, learn more about the donation process and how to kick off your own voice drive. This event is for everybody, so we'll be celebrating with talks, presentations, and of course food, drink, and freebies. You can see there's an Eventbrite form to register yourself for free, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. We do have a limited number of tickets available, so please get yours before they're all gone. And again, I'll be sending this all out in an email to you afterwards. And that is the end of tonight's webinar. So if you are interested in getting in touch, I know there were some questions that we didn't have the opportunity to answer, so please send those through. You can get in touch with me at emily.webb@tobiidynavox.com, also our official Twitter handle at Tobii Dynavox and at EmilyWebbSLT. And then I've taken the liberty, RuPaul, of putting up your Twitter handle there. So at VocaliD Inc. and at Tweet RuPaul. And then we also have the Tobii UK Facebook group, the Tobii Dynavox Facebook page, and the Power Clinic online every 2 weeks. We've got some new webinars which we will be announcing shortly, so please keep your eye out for those. Thank you so much for coming along tonight, RuPaul. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
It's been my pleasure, absolutely, and I'm so excited to work with your group there.
Yeah, we're so excited to have this on board. I think it's a really amazing amazing project. And if you get the chance, please look at RuPaul's TED Talk online, because I watched it earlier again. I think I've watched it about 2 or 3 times, and it is incredibly moving. And yeah, we're just really grateful to have you on board. So thank you all for attending this evening. That is the end of tonight's Power Clinic. So good night and see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.